Hello, everyone, and welcome to the KOPE Life Nation Show. I'm so excited to be here with my special guests, Walt and Stephanie McKinley. And what makes them special to me is that they've been able to do something that I've seen a lot of my friends fail at, and that is continue to love each other through the hard times. It's something that actually sounds almost cliche, and it's something that we think we can do. We think that everyone has done it or whatever, but in reality, most marriages end in divorce. So many marriages actually get to a point early on where they feel like they don't even know why they're married. And so here's what happens in most marriages. And I've done the research. You can Google it if you don't believe me. But a lot of marriages end in the beginning, they end early in the first couple of years, or they end after year 14. And the reason they end after year 14 or 15 is because that's when the adults believe their children are old enough to handle it. So it's not even that the love lasted 15 years, it's that they were just waiting on the children. And so that's why I'm bringing you Walt and Stephanie, because maybe you're in that situation. Maybe you feel like my marriage is on the rocks, it's struggling, and I just want an outside voice. But you don't want to call the marriage counselor. You don't want to rely on YouTube. You would actually like to talk to a couple of people who are making it happen. So without further ado, welcome Walt and Steph. How you doing?
Hey, how's everybody doing out there? We're
Oh,
excited to be here.
man, we're pumped, bro. Like, thank you so much, Charleston, for having us on. I think there can't be enough conversations where people get back in the arena of marriage. Reason we wear warrior shirts for this is because in order to have a very successful marriage, and we've been married 24 years, and that didn't come without some come to Jesus moments. Let me tell you, talking about loving each other when we didn't like each other. We had to make some decisions along this journey to really fight for each other and our marriage and the legacy that we're leaving, and learn to love each other even when we didn't like each other in certain times, and learn how to overcome
Mhm.
that and become stronger in those moments. And it's interesting, I read a statistic the other day: 52% of first marriages now end in divorce. That causes a lot of trauma. It causes a lot of hardships on the individuals and families, and children. And if we can even save one marriage, man, we're stepping into our purpose and God's gift for us, that's for sure.
See, when you say divorce can cause trauma, I'm gonna talk about that for half a second, right?
Hmm.
So, as one researcher, her last name was Foa, Dr. Foa, was talking about, she called it shattered assumptions theory. And shattered assumptions theory is when you have a view of yourself, the world around you, and your future. So there are assumptions that you make about it. And sometimes when you get divorced, those assumptions are shattered. And
Hmm.
that's what's traumatic. And so when we apply that to divorce, it's, I had this assumption that I was worthy of this marriage, of this love, that I was loved a certain kind of way. The world around me encompassed this spouse, this family, this home, and my future encompassed all of us moving forward. And so what happens is these assumptions are your core beliefs about who you are, the world around you, and your future. And so you literally cannot comprehend a future that's any different. So when you get that information, and the information can come in the form of a divorce decree, when you get that information, it's hard to reconcile that with the future that you thought you were going to have. And I'm just putting this out there because when you say the word trauma, that's not something to sound fancy. It's legit. It's the real deal. It doesn't have to be traumatic, but for a lot of people, it is.
Mm.
So I want to ask you about a couple of things that I heard, a couple quotes, and I want to get your take on this. So this is, I actually have two from Esther Perel. Maybe I'll come up with another one later. But Esther Perel says that in most marriages that end in divorce, or that are in that rocky time, one person is trying not to lose themselves, and the other person is trying not to lose the other. So you're trying to hold on to the other person, and they're trying to hold on to themselves. What do you think about that?
Interesting that you said that, because I feel like that's where we were at one point, where our marriage hit a low point. I was a new mother, and I was just trying to cope with that, turning my life upside down, because when you have a child, it completely changes your whole lifestyle, and you're not really ever going to be prepared for it. And I was just trying to survive every day and get through. And I think my husband could not really, he didn't have the same experience. I mean, it did affect him too, but it affected our relationship in that he used to get all of my attention and all of those things. And when the child comes in, they take your attention, and there's not a lot left to give your spouse. So we did reach a really low point for that reason, and that's what I felt like. I felt like I was kind of fighting off depression, and I didn't know what I even needed or how to get it. And I was just trying to work through that myself and also take care of another human being. And it was just a lot. I felt overwhelmed, and I don't think he could really, and then he had his own traumas from his childhood where he felt neglect and abandonment as a child. And I think it was like me being in that space was it was triggering that for him. And so there was a lot of complex dynamics
Mhm.
going on there that I think a lot of couples go through when they have children. And, you know, he can explain from his point of view too what he was feeling, but I that quote does describe it kind of
Yeah.
perfectly. It's like I was trying to figure out myself and really feeling this like, who am I now kind of feeling. And he's like, where did my wife go?
Yeah, and I think, we went from one version of us, no kids,
Yeah.
to the next version of us, which was little kids. And I was the one trying to hang on. But in the interim, and I think this is what people don't realize, our life experiences and the triggers that we have, maybe from unhealed experiences, really do kind of shape how we're reacting or responding in the present. And in this moment, I grew up with a lot of trauma and a lot of abuse. And, you had me on the show before, just me, and we talked about that. And so for us, I felt abandoned. I didn't feel loved. It triggered deep emotional responses from me where I just kind of started shutting down. She started shutting down. We weren't having the radical conversations and communicating at all. Because frankly, I don't even think we saw the forest through the trees at that point. And it really took, and I'm sure we'll get into it at some point, a come to Jesus moment to shake us both enough at our foundation to say, wow, we got to stop pointing the finger at the other one. And we got to turn the mirror on ourselves and say, how are we contributing to the demise of this relationship by making it about each of us individually, not how we can contribute, but what we needed and what we weren't getting and how we were triggered and how we were feeling versus how am I really truly being a partner with my spouse right now? And how can I support them in the way that they need so we can strengthen our love and evolve our love through the season that we're in?
I love that. I love that. Just so many aspects of our lives we don't apply to our marriage, to our relationships. And the reason why is because we're in control of so many aspects of our lives. But when it comes to marriage, it's their fault. That's what it
Can't
is.
control your spouse, you can only
Mhm.
control you.
And so but what I'm thinking about as you're speaking on this, and you go through these shifts in marriage, these different phases in life, and I think about your own self-awareness. A couple of things I think of. First of all is being present in the moment. So the only way that I can be feeling neglected now, you're not paying attention to me now. The only way I feel neglected now is if I'm also thinking about what's happened in the past.
Mhm.
Because in the present, if I'm, say, in the living room, and I'm watching TV, and we have snacks in the kitchen, am I gonna be okay if you don't come in the living room? Like I'll be fine. In the present moment, I'm okay. But I'm thinking about, well, Tuesday, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. And remember last Thursday when you said this and you didn't even notice this 3 weeks ago. And so I'm not present. I'm focused on the past.
Yeah.
And there's the past between the two people. And then like you guys mentioned, Walt, the past from your childhood.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of times we have to recognize what is it that we're really feeling. And when I say what we're feeling, I mean what's happening in our body because emotions are physiological. So is this due to love or lack of it, or is it attachment? Is it abandonment? Is it love? Is it lust? Is it trauma triggers? What is it? Is this because, do I honestly think that you don't love me any more than you did last Friday? Or is my body feeling like or reminding me of abandonment that had nothing to do with the other person from 20 years ago? And so, if you could just speak on that a little bit about the self awareness piece and figuring out why you're having the experience that you're having.
It's crazy because Steph, I know you're going to go off on self-awareness here soon because that's her jam. Let me tell you. Thank God she's self-aware because there's been a lot of years I wasn't. That's why we're still married, probably. So it's crazy because the mind's so powerful, though, and you can either accelerate the positive mentally, or you can accelerate the negative. And it's like you said, they're in there getting a snack. They didn't bring you one, let's say, and you're like, okay, one way, man. You know what? Every time. And you start speaking in these absolutes. Every time you go in there, you don't ever bring me a snack. You just sit there on your phone. We're always late. And you just perpetuate this negativity. And next thing you know, you went from just like, they didn't bring you a snack and this petty thing that you got a hold of, and you're divorced. I mean, it really happens that way, and the resentment builds. And to me, it's all rooted in expectation. And
Yes.
expectations will kill a relationship. It's like when we were going through our struggle, Steph was doing all these amazing things, but I would focus on the one thing she didn't do. And then that would perpetuate the negativity. And then I would speak an app. It's always this, it's always that. And then that definitive kind of statement draws a line in the sand where you feel like you can't come back from it. And when you realize, when you strip away expectations and you replace it with gratitude, and I looked in those moments and said, look at these, out of these 5 things I want my wife to do, look at these 4 beautiful things that she's doing. Man, I'm so lucky. Imagine how different our relationship would have been versus focusing on the one. I didn't always have that kind of self-awareness. I mean, I think that's gained through perspective and pain and, the trials and tribulations of life. And then your choice of whether or not you're going to see it for what it is and be honest with yourself. So I think self-awareness plays a huge key on this whole piece of this and where you go mentally.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned how we were talking about how we kind of unconsciously, I think, we revert back to what we've known in the past, whether that's just in our own past relationship or past like our childhood growing up and watching our parents' relationships. And there's something I realized after like we hit our low point and then we started to rebuild our marriage. I realized later that, you know, something he brought up was that I would compare him to my dad. And I didn't even realize I was like, I knew I did say it, but I didn't realize how he was taking it because I was trying to communicate that the behavior that he was doing at that time, he was going fishing a lot. And I felt like he was spending a lot of time fishing and not with us, not with me and the kids. And my dad used to go golfing a lot and he didn't spend time with us. And so what I was trying to say was I was comparing the behavior like you're doing that and it's reminding me of how my dad did that and that's triggering me and it's making me upset. But he was taking
How it actually came out
was you're just telling me I'm like your dad and I'm nothing like your dad. And so he wasn't even like, he wasn't getting it at all. He's just like, I'm not like your dad. Why are you even saying that? And getting like pissed off about it. And I'm like, it's not what I'm trying to say. Like, I didn't know how to explain it, and I was trying not to trigger him at the same time. So this is where the communication stuff, we can't say enough and key in on is so important. We have to be so specific with our communication. We can't just say generalized things. And like he said, we can't just say, you always do this and use those kind of generalizations. We have to be specific. And if we're going to share how we feel about something, we need to say it that way. I feel like this, not you always do this, and where we're blaming the other person. We have to actually take accountability for our own feelings, express it as our own feelings. Like, I feel like you're doing this, so that they understand you're not attacking and saying like that this is what you do, and that you're saying this is how I'm taking it, so that they have a chance to say, well, that's not how I intended it. You need to have those kind of specific communication with each other to where you can understand where the other person's coming from, because a lot of times whatever we're doing, we're not even realizing how that's coming across to the other person, and we have a different perspective, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's almost like if you paint a picture and I want to describe to you over the phone what I painted, and then you paint what I tell you, and then I'm mad at you because you didn't paint the same thing I painted.
Right. Like, so you see how ridiculous it seems, but this is what we all do in our relationship.
Exactly. But here's the difference in marriage compared to other kinds of relationships, right? So if I had that conversation with a friend of mine, we would crack up laughing. But in marriage, it's, well, you must not have been listening because you don't love me. And it's, wait a minute, it's just a painting. Like, why am I even on the phone with you?
Yes. Right.
Because we are dragging up all those past things and those past hurts, and
Well,
sometimes
it's like
the other
compound
person
resentment.
is like, because sometimes there were times where you would be upset about something, and I'm thinking, I'm just looking at what's happening in that moment. Like, why are you so upset about this? It just seems like nothing, not a big deal. But really, it's because he was, attaching it to something from the past, or there was more behind that than what was actually happening in that moment. And I'm not getting that, or vice versa.
Well, you know what it is? It's like compound interest. We all know what that is, right? It's compound resentment, man.
Yes.
And it's not having the conversations before you even get to the level of being pissed off about it or resentful or hurt in a real way. It's having the conversations to say, hey, I'm kind of feeling like this. You're doing this. It's making me feel this way. I just want to talk to you about it now. And then both couples meeting in the middle. It's not my way or the highway. Both couples meeting in the middle, having a compromise, working on those things together before you get to resentment. It took the come to Jesus moment before we realized, and we almost lost our marriage at 11 years. We're at 24 now, before we realized, wow, we haven't been communicating at all. We think we are good communicators. We suck. And we got to start having these real radical conversations on these little petty things that are like creeping in before you don't paint the painting that I want you to. And now I'm pissed off times 10 because the compound resentment has built so much in so many other areas.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, right? So it's you didn't paint the painting that I described. And you remember 3 weeks ago when I asked you to do that one thing? It's like, that has nothing to do with the painting. But that's what happens.
They don't even go together. Like what you just said, like they're telling you they're mad about whatever's happening in that moment, but really they're like, then they brought up something from 2 weeks ago and you're like, wait, what?
Oh, Lord.
So I think what happens is, in our painting analogy, I have these thoughts and emotions that present themselves physiologically in a certain kind of way. And then what I need to do is I need to figure out, what is that? Why am I feeling that way? But this is subconsciously. And so my mind goes back to the last time my body felt that way so that I can validate feeling this way. And it's one thing to say, why am I upset about this? So that I can answer the question in a solution-based manner. It's another thing to say, why do I feel like this? What else did you do to make me feel like this? And I think it's very easy to answer that question. So how do you build up, I want to say, the self-awareness or the mindset to ask yourself that? So if I'm upset with you You might say, why are you upset? I'm asking you, how do I get to the point of asking myself, why am I upset, and not having the other person's name in my answer? Like if I'm mad at Walt, why am I mad at Walt? That has nothing to do with Walt. How do you get to that point of asking yourself that question?
I will tell you, I had to work on this a lot myself because even recently, there's been times where I caught myself getting really upset about something, and I like to use the word trigger because in those moments, I feel triggered, and sometimes I now stop and start asking myself, why am I so upset about this? Is it really XYZ, or is this something else that's been bothering me that I haven't mentioned or talked about? Because I'm trying to think of an example I can say. So let's say, for instance, one of the big reasons that we had to come to do this moment was Walt ended up having an emotional affair with someone else. And by that, I mean like it was mostly through text and chat and things like that, and not necessarily physical. He didn't actually see the person regularly. They didn't live near us, but um and that really broke our trust. And so there are times now where even I don't know, it'll just be he might talk to a woman that I think is attractive, and then I start thinking like, "Oh, is this going to turn into something more?" And it starts triggering my, you know, the the thing that made me so like I was ready to walk away from our marriage. So it's like I have to catch myself sometimes, like, I'll catch myself being kind of rude to him over something that, he may not understand where it's coming from, but it's because I saw something and it triggered me, and then I'm directing that at him, but he doesn't really know why. And then I've had to come back and tell him like, "Well, hey, like you had this conversation with this person and I just felt like it was kind of more than friendly or something." I'll explain to him why it upset me. And I realized like I need to do that. Like as soon as I start feeling that way, I need to say something so that he understands where I'm coming from. And it doesn't, like he said, then it doesn't lead to this built up resentment because I didn't tell him, I didn't talk about it. I'm not realizing that he doesn't even know I was feeling that way. And before you know it, it's built up. And then I'm just blowing up at him about something else. And he has no idea where it's coming from. Because that's what really happens is we hold on to these little resentments. We're like, oh, this isn't
Mhm.
really a big deal. I don't want to make something out of nothing. And we keep it to ourselves. But little by little, that's building inside of us to where it ends up blowing up. Because the way our personality types are, he is the type that he does voice his opinion when he feels something, right when he feels it. And so he communicates pretty well. But I am the type of person that I don't want to hurt someone, and I don't like confrontation, so I will just hold on to those things inside. And but eventually if it builds up enough, then I blow up at some point. So I am learning that I have to speak up about things when they bother me and not hold on to them. So I hope
Yeah.
that kind of explains what.
Well, and I think on the flip side of that, and because this is about relationships, right? So that's a lot about the self-awareness, and I think that's a great example. But it's also okay when you're the spouse now, and they're having that conversation with you. You really got to resist the temptation to get defensive.
Mm,
And it's important for me as a spouse to say, hey, I did break that trust. There was a lot that went into 11 years of our marriage that got me to the point where I was even open to getting texts from some other woman, right? And then sending texts back, which was inappropriate in itself. I broke that trust. So now, even in the entrepreneur journey, I meet other women, I meet other men. Like, so if I'm having a conversation with someone and she feels a certain kind of way, I got to be willing to say, it's nothing. Like, my brain ain't even there. Like, we're more in love today than we've ever been. But I hear you. I'm going to receive that. I'm going to really take that in. And then what adjustments would you like me to make too? because otherwise I'm assuming I'm giving her what she needs out of this whole situation to feel safe and comfortable and confident and not be triggered by it. But if I don't actually ask that, especially if she doesn't tell me, if I don't actually ask her in return, then I'm not going to actually be able to give her what she needs in order to really let go of some of that little, a lot of years later now, where there's always going to be a percent of trust that I broke that I probably won't really be able to get back. And I have to be willing to accept that and take ownership for that. And then I want to say one more thing. I think it's important for everybody individually. Stop pointing the finger at everybody else in your life. Stop pointing the finger at your spouse. Start pointing the finger at yourself. Start looking in the mirror in these moments. If you're triggered, if you're in pain, if you're hurt, if you're an ego, if you're in all these things that we get in, we all do it. Even now in our marriage, like we catch ourselves faster, but it's not like it doesn't happen. When you're in these, you need to, and you feel emotional and you're reactive. You need to take a step back, take a breath, and start to do a little bit of searching. Lean into that painful place. Don't run from it and lock the door and bolt lock and hide from it, pretend like it didn't happen. And I'm not going to deal with that. You got to run into the pain, because where you run into the pain is where you learn the lesson. It's where you grow. It's where you become the best version of yourself, which will allow you to become the best spouse and parent and leader at work and all the things that we do. But it starts with the individual. So turn the mirror on yourself. If you react, take ownership of that. Figure out how you can respond. And the next time you're triggered, because it will happen again, the next time you get triggered with something like that, now you've equipped yourself and you at least have the emotional awareness. Now it's your choice on whether or not you react again, or do you respond and control those emotions and not let it drive you to that reactive point again. And man, and then you respond once, you respond twice, you respond 3 times. And the next thing you know, you just respond. Takes no level of intuitiveness. You don't have to think about it. It just happens. But if you run from the pain instead of leaning into the pain, you're never going to be able to have that self-discovery that you really need.
I love that. I really love you speaking on that ownership, and I want to kind of elaborate on that, and then I want to go back and ask Stephanie another question about what she just shared. But when you're talking about pointing the finger at yourself and looking in the mirror, what I think of is deleting the word fault, right? So it's not that it's my fault or I'm taking blame. It's I'm taking ownership of the solution, because the negative event has already happened. So no one needs to be blamed. But in this situation, one of us needs to take ownership on a solution, on a way forward. So I'm not looking in the mirror saying it's your fault, you're stupid. That's self-judgment. I'm looking in the mirror and saying, okay, now it's your turn to find the solution. And the solution could be, I'm sorry, how can I fix this? Right. So the solution can have a lot of different looks, but again, it's let me go in the corner and blame myself further. It's let me take ownership and work towards a solution. But Stephanie, you were talking about communicating, and my question is, how do I communicate to someone? Suppose I'm feeling insecure about myself, right? And so maybe if I'm with a woman and she describes what will be the perfect man, and like, I'll be honest, any woman that describes her perfect man is probably going to describe someone younger, richer, taller, and more muscular than me. You are
the perfect man for that right woman.
Yeah.
So what happens is I can see her speaking to someone that seems to fit that bill, and then I'm feeling kind of insecure. It looks kind of flirty, and it makes me uneasy. And I know that uneasiness is kind of stemming from maybe my insecurity plus her past behavior. So my question is, how do I communicate being uncomfortable without sounding accusatory?
Well, this is exactly what I kind of was just explaining to you guys in that example, is because this still happens for me. And this is 12 years ago. And I still have moments of that pain is still there. It's always going to be there. That's never going to go away. I just have learned how to cope with it better. I think we all have our own insecurities. And so I just have learned that to really speak up about it when I'm feeling that way, to say, hey, I need to talk to you about this because it's something that's been bothering me. And I will explain kind of the situation of what, you know, I, I took away, because I think I used to be blaming. I used to always uh, kind of push the fault on him. And
Use you in the
yeah,
statements.
and
Yeah.
I did say it wrong. That's why I say we should always come to the other person saying, I feel like this, instead of you do this. And I stopped using him and saying, blaming him. And because I did come to a realization that, like, even though I was feeling that way, it doesn't necessarily mean he was doing anything wrong. It felt
Right.
like it to me, but it didn't necessarily mean he was. It just was how I was taking it because of my own feelings and my own hurt and my own insecurity was bothering me. So, and that's what we tend to do. We tend to project it onto our significant other and blame them. And, you know, I have to say, even I kind of want to go back to this. I'll come back to what you asked, but something I want to point out, because anyone who's dealt with infidelity in their marriage in any way, um, it is really hard to rebuild that trust, and it takes a lot of time, and it doesn't happen overnight. And we went through we had some bigger fights about it, and we we didn't always handle that perfectly or well. Um, we
It's a
we had
fact.
some that um, it was rough there for a couple of years, and even just to fight our way back, it's just, we knew we loved each other, and it was worth fighting for. It always is worth fighting for, I believe. But I have to say, because it's very easy if I were to say he cheated on me, it would be very easy for everyone to just take my side and be like, it's always wrong to cheat. It doesn't matter what was going on. It's wrong to cheat, right? But I know that that's not the truth, because
Right.
it always takes both parties. Something's always happening there. Someone doesn't cheat for no reason either. Like, it's the other person has to take some accountability too. And I know that I have kind of tried to explain this, in that I feel like I'm kind of an empath personality. So I feel things very strongly, deeper than most people. And so my protection mechanism when I feel that way is I shut down completely emotionally. So I will just shut down and become numb. And I know that I became that way. I was numb, and to protect myself. And so I was shutting him out. And I mean, I can understand why he ended up, you know, liking someone else's attention, because he wasn't getting it from me. And
What I
I
think I'll
understood that
add
I
in here
did that.
too is I was telling her that she was shutting me out. And I can't, another year or two, like, I don't know what's going to happen. And so,
Yeah.
and that doesn't condone my actions.
But
Right?
I wasn't hearing it, because I had my own anger, and I just felt like he wasn't hearing me. So then I wasn't willing to hear him. And that's what we do. We get into this negative cycle that we're each doing that to each other. So it takes somebody to come out of it and be the bigger person and say, hey, like, we need to stop this and start doing something different. And unfortunately, a lot of times it takes that rock bottom moment to snap us out of that. And that's what happened to us. We came to that moment of like, well, are we really done, or are we going to fight for this? And, we realized the love was still there. We were just angry at each other. And so we decided to fight for it. We had children. And so I have to say, I think it comes down to, it is a big piece, is self-awareness, having that self-awareness that you both play a part, and asking yourself the questions, how am I contributing to this? Because it's very easy to blame the other person. We can always do that. But you need to take some accountability for yourself. And then, like I said, it's that accusatory language. We can't say you always, or you, any of those absolute statements you should never use. And we all do it. We still do it sometimes. We have to catch ourselves and say, I feel like this. So if you were to approach her and tell her, like, you wanted to say how you were feeling insecure, but you don't really want to say it that way, but you just say, I feel like this, so that they understand that that's just what you're feeling. You're not necessarily saying that's what's happening.
I want to add one piece on this because this is important when you have the conversations. You're already hurt. So your tendency to open up that real emotional bridge of vulnerability that connects people in a very special way feels limited to you in that moment because you don't want to, like Steph said, she'll shut down, she'll regress, right? And won't really open up how she really feels. I wasn't in those moments anymore either because I was hurt. As we had that come to Jesus moment, we were the most vulnerable and honest we had ever been with each other in our relationship at that point. I mean, really, like, it was it. Oh, we were fighting for it. We laid it all out on the line. We really talked about how we felt individually. And as a man, that was kind of difficult to say, I feel abandoned. I feel hurt. I feel this. I feel that. All these emotions that I felt. But man, if that didn't connect us in the moment and it showed us in our vulnerability, we could see, I don't even know that I really talked about it like this before, but we could see the love. We could feel the love. We knew we were still in love with each other. It was just masked by hurt and pain and a couple years of resentment where we didn't have these radical conversations. So it's what Steph said, non-accusatory, how you feel the situation is making you, ownership of your own actions, and then just massive amounts of vulnerability. Because if you're at that precipice, you owe it to yourself to have it anyway, and you owe it to your spouse and vice versa. And you just can't repair, lock arms, and move forward together, fighting for your marriage, being the warrior for your marriage, if you don't have that level of connection via that vulnerability. So I just wanted to add that one little layer to it.
I love it. I love it so much because you guys really talked about being vulnerable and honest while repairing the relationship. And I think a lot of couples, they don't know how they do that. What I mean is they don't know how they repair. If you were to speak to just a bunch of different married couples,
Mm-hmm.
and you ask them, when life is hard, when you've been hurt, what is your process of repair? They may not know. I don't know. Well, I just kind of suck it up and I move on. Well, everything's my fault anyway.
Yeah.
And I've been through that where there would be something difficult and I would kind of talk my way through it, reason through it in my head so that my spouse didn't even know that I was doing that because I felt almost like the second most important person in the marriage. And so when you only have two people and you're number two, well what does my boy Ricky Bobby say, right? If you ain't first, you're last.
Trademark Ricky Bobby.
Yeah. And so I put myself there, and the issues that I had, I worked through them myself, including making excuses for her behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of things, instead of opening up like you guys are saying and just being vulnerable and putting it out on the table. And so what I want to kind of do is, I want to give you another quote and get your take on this one. This is another one from Esther Perel, and she says, I think you guys might have fun with this one. You can be right or you can be married.
Yeah, that's perfect.
I haven't heard it that way, but I've told other people who struggle, even in my own family, a lot of conflict, right? And I say, you could be right or you can have a relationship. Yep. Pick one. Like, what's the use of being right if you're all by yourself? Is there even really a right? When Steph and I were struggling, were either of us right? Right? Or was repairing our marriage actually right?
Well, I believe everyone's entitled to their feelings. It's not wrong to have feelings. Like, you have your feelings, you're entitled to your feelings, and everyone's entitled to their feelings. It's just sometimes the other person doesn't understand them. So, and that's why I say, we talk to so many couples that are struggling, and when I hear them saying, she did this or he did that, and they're just blaming, or it's the pity party. Oh, it's always my fault. Like, it's one or the other, but you never hear them say like, it's both of us, or just own their own part. I almost never hear someone say that. So it's like you can just tell they haven't done the work. They haven't done the self-work to realize like that you played a part somehow. And everyone does. Like we can't it's no one's going to be able to see how they come across from the, you know what I mean, to the other person. And we always say there's three sides to every story because there's always each person's feelings and how it happened and how it really happened.
The truth.
Because we're all shaped by our own experiences. Like it's just inevitable. Everyone has a different experience in this life and it affects everything in our life. How we look at it is through our own lens because of what has happened to us in our life. And Walt and I came to this marriage with totally different lenses. I mean,
backgrounds for sure.
yeah. We've talked about this several times. Like we're like almost like polar opposites. Like he came from a marriage or parents where they were divorced when he was young, and he was always being raised by a single parent. My parents are still together today. We've been together for 50 years. So just even how we saw our parents go through a relationship is completely different. He's a man, I'm a woman. He's an extrovert, I'm an introvert. Like everything about us is different. So how we approach almost anything is totally opposite.
Well, think about this. Think about this. You could go to dinner, right? Like, let's say I love steak. I got steak analogies even on our podcast. I always be talking about steak analogies. I like your bias, okay? So you can go to the steakhouse, right? And you're in there, and one person can be same experience, same lived experience, same time, same place. One person's like, man, these rolls with the cinnamon butter, they'd be tasting so good. And the other person's like, bro, if we can't get some service and some drinks over here, same exact experience, but the perspective of each person's experience is different. And I really just recently, I think I've become way more aware of this fact. When I wrote my memoir, my sister and I lived we had extraordinarily abusive circumstances, and we lived some same experiences. So she read my memoir and she called me and she's like, well, I don't remember it that way. I remember it this. I remember that. I remember it. Almost like kind of pissed off at me that I wrote it the way that I did. And I said, but I remember it the way I remember it. So the core, the fact that in this instance with us going to the steakhouse, we both can say we went to the steakhouse at this time, at this place. We're in Arizona. It was 118 degrees outside. We're so glad to get in air conditioning. And then nuances of it is what changes. And those nuances that people don't respect in each other makes them feel right and justified and destroys marriages. You got to respect the nuances and the feelings that come along with that, even if you don't totally agree with what they're saying, because it's not your experience, there's their experience. And are you going to have the respect for their experiences and their emotion or not? Are you, not them, are you going to have it? And the reason we tell our story the way we do, bro, is because we're so vulnerable in telling it, because we know when you fight for your marriage and we know when you lock arms and you do it together, and both people got to be all in on this, that you can come out of that season, dude. And it's like adding rocket fuel to your marriage for the rest of your life. Like as entrepreneurs, we spend more time together today than we have in our 26 years of being together or 24 years of being married. And I can't speak for you, baby. I'm happier and I'm more in love than I've ever been. We have so much fun. It doesn't mean we don't argue over petty little dumb stuff about creating a clip or doing this, but we don't stay there. You know what I mean? And then we laugh and we say, God, that's so stupid. We're like getting on each other's nerves about this. And we just love each other, enjoy each other, and be in gratitude for where each other is at. So if this is about creating belief in people, believing, both parties, believing if they do the work, if they put the mirror on themselves, if they become the best version of themselves for their spouse, and you guys can help each other's cup overflow, not fill, that's your responsibility, help each other's cup overflow of life. Damn, like the marriage you can have is extraordinary and life-changing, not only for you, but the people around you. It's beautiful.
Well, so that's something I wanted to talk about too, is you just mentioned is we can't fill each other's bucket. We can help it. We can help, we can add to it, but ultimately you have to be able to make yourself happy. You can't expect anyone else to do that for you. You can't be thinking like it's the spouse that's going to make you happy, because they're not. If you're not happy with yourself, you're never going to be happy. Doesn't matter who's in your life. So that's why it really takes that inner work of dealing with the things that have happened to you through your life, and that you face those things and face your pain, because nothing else is going to fix it. You have to face your pain at some point. And you can't blame it on your spouse or your parents or anybody else in your life, because it really comes down to you. And something else I wanted to say is the communication piece. When I was talking about specific communication, this is just a quick example that I use a lot because it gives people a good concrete example of what I mean by specific communication. So for Valentine's Day, Walt used to always give me roses, red roses. And
That's
I
what I
loved
did.
I love the gift. Is generous. It's a nice gesture. All of those things. And it's not that I didn't love them. It's just some point I finally told him, like, hey, like I love that you get me roses. Don't take this the wrong way, but they die so quickly. They die within like 2 or 3 days. And so I told him to stop getting me the roses because I felt like it's a waste of money. Like, you spend this and it dies in 2 days. I'd rather you get me like a different kind of bouquet that has different flowers, and I can give it flower food and it lasts like 2 weeks. I'd much prefer that than the roses. Or just get me something else anything else that was like something I can keep. I don't know, just the way I was, right? And we've talked to this couple through a workshop, and this comes back to like the 5 love languages and loving each other, how they need to be loved. Because, she was an acts of service person. And so she told him, like, same thing, like, she didn't want the roses. So that wasn't her thing, 'cause she's frugal. And she's like, I don't want you to waste the money, but I love when you fill my car with gas. Like, so I don't have to do it, or you do the dishes, or you do something else. She communicated that that's how she felt her bucket got filled, or how he could help fill her bucket. And the same kind of thing, like, we all have our own love language and how we like to be loved. And a lot of times we tend to love someone the way we want to be loved, but that's not necessarily how they want to
Mhm.
be loved.
Mhm.
So for Walt, like, he's physical touch. So and not, everyone jumps to the bedroom, but it's not always just that.
Not only the intimate physical touch, although
That, he likes his hair tickled, or he just likes to be holding hands, or, there's just different ways that you can have physical touch that aren't always sexual. It's, because even I'm a very affectionate person. So I like physical touch also, and not just in that way, but, I like to hold hands. I like to cuddle. I like hugs. So we have to communicate these kind of things that specifically, so that we can both be happy. Because if
so,
I don't communicate that, I'm not really going to be happy with the gift he gives me.
Mhm.
And also, he's always going to be feeling let down. Like, he can tell I don't like it, but I'm not saying why. So we get left feeling that emptiness, or that, you know, we're not doing something right. And really, it's just they didn't know. So we don't, and no one's going to know if we don't communicate that to them.
So if you don't take anything else out of this podcast today, go buy the 5 love language book,
Mhm.
read it for yourself, figure out what your love language book is. Gary Chapman, I think, wrote it years ago. Have your spouse or significant other read it. They need to figure out what their love language is. And then you tell each other what your love language is. And then you read it again to figure out how your spouse wants to be loved. And by the way, as parents, we did it for our kids.
Oh, and I'm going to go back to, that example that I gave when I said he was fishing a lot and it bothered me, because one of my primary love languages
Mhm.
is quality time. And so I felt like I wasn't getting the quality time with him, and he didn't understand because he didn't know that was my love language.
Right. Right. It will transform your relationship if you know those things and start there.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I love that. I love the communication part. I love everything you guys are talking about. And you remind me of something that I've said often. And I kind of want you to expand on this. Although you've already been kind of talking about it, but the idea that in our relationships, we have expectations. There are things that you should and should not do. And I say we have to choose connection over compliance. I believe that you get to a certain point in your marriage where you have these expectations. And so, because I have these expectations, maybe because there's something you've done a certain way for 12 years, right? And so then for me, it's like now I'm looking for what you're doing wrong.
Yes.
I'm checking your behavior against the rule book. And
Yeah.
so, what do you say about choosing connection over compliance?
Well, first, I think everybody should have requirements for how they're going to be treated. You think there's narcissists, there's abuse, there's things where some of this doesn't necessarily apply in the same way to the 80-90% of people in the population. You've got to have requirements for how you will and won't be treated. That's important. So I want to delineate between a requirement for yourself to protect your own peace and mental health and an expectation. And so an expectation is always rooted in selfishness, though. And for Steph and I, there's been times that we have had heavy expectations. And what we've learned is you always set yourself up for failure in those expectations. And it's not about having a compliant spouse, because what I need and what Stephanie needs, I'm going to give the example like sex, right? I'm a dude. Now I'm a little older now, but when I was a young man, I could have had sex every day, like a couple times a day. And let's just be real. It's how it is most of the time with a high sex drive person. Stephanie was like, no, I don't really need that bedroom time like that. What we realized was there needs to be a compromise. It can't just be my way, and it can't just be her way. There has to be a compromise. So we sat down, we communicated our needs with each other and the reasons why. And then we said, okay, like 2 or 3 times a week, we'll call it 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes we might schedule it, which can actually build anticipation. It's not as prescriptive as people think that it is. Sometimes it's spontaneous. Sometimes it could be at different times of day. Sometimes we were going to have sex and we didn't because we were tired. Because she's like, I'm tired. It's not like I'm trying to gaff you off. I just, and I can't, but if I expect it in the moment and I expect a compliant wife, 1, it's no fun. 2, it's like, then I'm just disappointed it doesn't happen. Instead of just saying, hey, in general, right? If we averaged it all out, it'd be 2 or 3 times a week and I could be happy. She's like, yeah, I'm still down for that. And then we move into our season and we both operate under that premise with no expectations, just gratitude when it happens and understanding that life can get in the way, catching ourselves when we're not meeting some of those requirements and those agreements that we talked about, having a conversation if necessary, just saying, we haven't had sex this week. We probably should. And it's, I'm being funny about it a little bit, but sex is huge in relationships. And there's people that use it as a weapon. And there's people that they don't have sex, but once every 2 months. And there's a misconnection there. But what I will say is not everybody's the same. And what works for Stephanie doesn't necessarily need to work for you. What needs to work for you is a conversation and the compromise that's going to happen in the interim to get away from the expectation and compliance and reach an agreeable situation where both people are partnering together to be the best version of themselves.
Well, I love that you brought up expectations because this was huge for us. This was a big piece.
Yeah.
We did a whole episode on expectations, and we could probably do several on it, because honestly, this is where the resentments build. This is, like he just said, when we expect something and it doesn't happen, then we're just disappointed. So what we learned is to really limit or eliminate expectations, because it just leads to disappointment. And that's where all the resentments build. Is we definitely had expectations of each other that we weren't living up to. And then that's what was leading to the resentment and us being angry with each other. And then, like we said, you get in that crazy cycle. And sometimes you end up at a stalemate where it's, well, you didn't do this, so I'm not going to do this. And that's exactly how it works. And, we did a statistic on a recent show that said something about, it said women, like 84% of women will have sex to get their husband to do household chores. But I think it's actually the reverse. And then we'll do household chores hoping to get sex. So this really happens. And that's where the resentments and the stuff starts to like stagnate, is when it's like, oh, she felt like he wasn't being helpful, so then she withholds sex, and then it's just this vicious cycle of doing that to each other, and to where then you're not having sex at all, you're not getting intimate, you're not doing any of those things, and that's where your relationship starts to fall and die. So I always say, like, yeah, expectations are like the killer of relationships.
I mean, life, the killer of life. Man, if we start being in gratitude more for the beautiful things happening around us, the beautiful things in the way our spouse is showing up, and we stop being like having the expectations where we're influencing them to meet our expectations, and instead we applaud and appreciate them for in those moments how they can even show up, because sometimes you're showing up as 5% of you because you had a rough day, and the next day you might be 105% of you. And if you just stay in appreciation for them and gratitude, you're going to just naturally influence them to want to do the same for you. But you got to take ownership of that stuff, man. And that's about you getting outside yourself and you fighting for your marriage.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you guys discuss expectations, because I think there's so much of that. There's so many expectations that we have about marriage just based on what we've seen growing up. You have expectations about marriage that your spouse has no idea. And so then what happens is at a certain point, and I've seen this where once you've been married for a while, you expect your spouse is going to start doing things a certain way because that's the way it is, as if you've married a carbon copy of someone, as if you married a cutout. But one thing that you guys talked about, right, is how when you guys hit this low point, and I guess you had a low point that maybe was a couple years, but that's a couple years out of 24, and a lot more. And so the reason I'm saying this is because, Stephanie, you said the word episode, and you guys have a podcast. And so when we're talking about the longevity, right? If we're together for 60 years and the 2-year turbulence was 45 years ago, it doesn't matter anymore.
That's right.
But what I want to know is, what is a legacy-driven marriage?
Yeah, we're saying that a marriage that stands the test of time, but one that is going to lead to, like, you're setting the example now for your children, and then your children are going to copy what you're doing. So that leads to the next generation and continues through each generation. Because, like, Walt came from a broken family, and that had been generations of broken family. And he's really trying to change that legacy moving forward for his family to where they don't know divorce and they don't see that. And they learn to fight for their marriage and they learn commitment. And we really want to, because we were at that point, like, we know what it feels like to be on the verge of divorce and how real it is. And we could have easily been another statistic, but we are hoping that through us, people will see the example that you can fight for your marriage, you can save your marriage, you can come back from hard things, and to enter marriage with commitment, because we look at the world and we're like what we just said, the statistics are 52% of marriages end in divorce. And we want to change that statistic and show people that it shouldn't be that way. We need to really look at marriage as we made those vows, and those vows are a commitment we're making. It's not, we can't think that divorce is an option. If we look at it that way, we're always going to be thinking, oh, well, I can always get divorced if this isn't working out. We should not view marriage that way. We should be viewing it as it's a commitment we're making to that person for life. That's really what it was intended to be. And we don't treat it that way because of society showing us like it's okay. And half of, the population is getting divorced. We want to change that. And so we're really on a mission to show people that you can have a healthy, happy marriage and it can continue for generations. And that's what we mean by legacy driven marriage.
Yeah. And I think, legacy driven marriage is not staying together for the kids. And legacy driven marriage is not staying in a toxic marriage with somebody who just has no self-awareness and is never going to come back. A legacy driven marriage is not, staying together so you control the optic of what your friends or family or society may say about you if you get a divorce. A legacy driven marriage is about two people And I want to emphasize this, 2 people. So if you're listening to this, I want you to go back and I want you to listen to it with your spouse, especially if you're in a season of struggle. A legacy driven marriage is about 2 people getting in the arena of marriage, being willing to get knocked down and cut and bruised and scraped up and get up and lock arms against all the things, the social media, the porn that's out there, the people, the temptations that are out there, all the things that are meant to just peel away at that sanctity and that covenant of marriage that do 50%, 52% of the time. And for you to lock arms with your spouse, for you to really be those warriors that you have inside of you, for you to fight for each other. Because even after your kids are gone, you're going to have each other. Even after your friends are gone, you're going to have each other. And at the end of the day, the love that you can create, if you believe that if you fight for it, you can have this. That's why we're so passionate about it, because we fought for it. So we know what's on the other side of that struggle season, that dark season, that are we going to make it season? And when you could get to there and you can come out that other side still swinging and fighting against all the things meant to knock you down in your life and your marriage, and you can stand together there, not only do you create a legacy for you and your family, you start to empower other people to create a legacy for themselves. And if we can do that in more marriages in our society, what a changed world we would have. That's what having a legacy driven marriage is all about.
I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And the truth is, when people get married, that's what they want. No one heard what you said and thought to themselves, "Oh, I never wanted that." They want to work together, and so when you speak on it, and I key in on the word that you use, Steph, generational, and so we can connect or correlate generational with legacy, right? And so if we can talk about things like passing down generational trauma, let's pass down generational love. Let's pass down generational fighting for what we want, what we desire, what we deserve. And so there's the generational love, the example that you said, and fighting for it. And I think about, as you say, being a warrior and fighting all of these external enemies of your marriage. But as you guys have said, really over and over again in the past hour, fighting the enemy within.
Yeah.
The enemy of your marriage could be your last relationship that actually ended 18 years ago, or something your mom or dad did to the other when you were 3.
Yes.
So let's leave that in the past and create a new legacy. I feel like it's so powerful because you guys are really demonstrating, if to no one else, to your own kids.
Yep.
This is how we fight, because we're worth fighting for. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being here. Everyone watching, if you want more of this is their sole focus. As legacy driven marriages, they're not just some random couple that talks every now and then. This is their purpose. Lots of couples can talk about marriage and give their ideas or whatever, but those couples are not in the I want to say, the arena of actually practicing what they preach and helping others. There are a lot of, when you guys contain yourselves, there are a lot of divorced marriage counselors out there. But you guys are not just saying what to do, but showing how to do it. And I appreciate that, because we need more walking, breathing, living examples to follow. And so thank you so much. I appreciate you. And do you guys have any last words before we close out this episode?
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for having us on, giving us this platform to speak to other couples, because we just, we really are really passionate about this. like I said, our purpose is coming from the pain that we went through as a married couple, and we understand those people that are struggling in their marriage, and we just really want to help people. And just so you know, we've never been to marriage counseling. Never went to counseling. We worked all this out. We did go to a Christian marriage conference and learned about from the love and respect cycle, and it really changed our marriage. And I think after being at that conference is a big driver of what has made us want to do this, is that we realize, like, well, we made it through that, and through the help of seeing another couple, and now we want to return that too. We want to be able to help save other marriages the way they saved ours. And so I just really thank you for having us on and trusting us with your audience.
Yeah, brother, I want to say, we've known each other a couple of years now, so I appreciate you so much, and just where your heart's always at, and your honesty and vulnerability, and just what you're doing on the KOPE Life podcast. Also, I think it's a beautiful thing. So we were very blessed to join everybody today. If you're listening out there and you're in the tough season, man, keep fighting. Don't give up. I promise you, it's worth it. We know firsthand. The first 21 episodes of our podcast was focused on the individual, on the self. How do you become the best version of you? The last 4 or 5 now, because we just released 26 this week, have been specifically about marriage, and that's our focus moving forward. We wanted to really make it about the individual first, and then how to strengthen and elevate your marriage, and how to create a legacy at the end of your life where there's no regret, something you could be proud of, something your children and the people around you, they can stand on your shoulders, the giant shoulders and the giant legacy you've created, and elevate that generationally to where you really eradicate any negativity that you've had in your generational cycle and create something so positive and so beautiful and so full of love that people are still talking about you years from now. And I'll give one last thing. We are on every single major podcasting network, including YouTube. So if you want to see our mugs joking each other and her slapping my arm when I'm being funny and stuff, join us. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook at Legacy Driven Marriages. We've created groups and places where people can go, because we want people that are willing to be in the arena of their marriage and really fighting for their relationship to have a place to join with other people and kind of really get that daily inspiration, man, that keeps you engaged. And if you do that, you're going to win really big at life. And I can't wait to meet each and every single one of you guys and to have you join this journey and this movement with us. So thank you so much. What a blessing.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to close out the show. I appreciate everyone who was listening. Walt and Steph for being here. Love you guys. Take care. And until next time, just be good.